Behind the velvet curtains and blinding camera flashes of British show business, a silent tragedy was unfolding. We worship them as silver screen goddesses and national treasures, yet their own children often waited in cold, empty nurseries or distant boarding schools. Today, we expose the heartbreaking reality of 10 legendary mothers who seemingly chose the applause of strangers over the cries of their own infants. From the swinging 60s to the 90s, these icons made a chilling calculation: fame first, family second. Who are the stars that surrendered their flesh and blood for a standing ovation? Subscribe and share your thoughts. Can a career ever justify an empty cradle? Let us begin. Vivien Leigh. To the watching world, she was the epitome of delicate beauty and fiery talent, the woman who brought two of cinema's most iconic heroines to life. Yet, behind the legend of Vivien Leigh lay a domestic reality that was far removed from the romantic scripts she memorized. Long before she became the undisputed queen of the British stage and a Hollywood deity, Vivien made a life-altering choice that would cast a long shadow over her private history. At the tender age of 19, she gave birth to her only child, a daughter named Suzanne. However, the stifling routine of a 1930s housewife in London was never going to be enough to contain her burning artistic spirit. Vivien felt suffocated by the nursery and the expectations of traditional motherhood. When the call of the theatre became too loud to ignore, she effectively surrendered the day-to-day care of little Suzanne to her own mother, Gertrude, and a succession of nannies. This was not merely a temporary arrangement for a few weeks of work, it was a fundamental shift in her life's priorities. As her fame skyrocketed and she secured the role of Scarlett O'Hara, the Atlantic Ocean became a physical barrier between mother and child. Vivien was conquering America, while Suzanne was growing up in England, often waiting for letters that were sporadic at best. The situation became even more complex when Vivien embarked on her legendary and turbulent romance with Laurence Olivier. Her life became a whirlwind of international tours, film sets, and high society gatherings, leaving little room for a small child. Suzanne was eventually placed in a convent boarding school, a common practice for the upper classes, but in this case, it served to further widen the emotional chasm. Vivien would visit, of course, but she often appeared more like a glamorous, distant fairy godmother than a hands-on parent. She would arrive in a cloud of expensive perfume and fur, bearing gifts, only to vanish again into her world of rehearsals and premieres. Those close to the actress later whispered that Vivien struggled to connect with the maternal role because she was so consumed by her own intense emotions and her dedication to her craft. She believed that she belonged to her public, and the mundane duties of raising a daughter were simply incompatible with the destiny she had carved out for herself. The tragedy was not born of malice, but of a singular, blinding focus on art. Vivien's later struggles with her fragile mental health further complicated their bond, making consistency almost impossible. Suzanne grew up knowing her mother primarily through newsreels, magazine covers, and the hushed whispers of adults. Although they maintained a relationship until Vivien's untimely passing in 1967, the distance of those early, formative years could never fully be bridged. Vivien Leigh achieved the immortality she craved, leaving a legacy of brilliance on celluloid, but the price was a relationship defined by absence. She remains a stark example of the impossible choice many female stars faced: the adoration of millions, purchased with the loneliness of one. Enid Blyton. For generations of British children, her name was synonymous with magic, adventure, and the comforting promise of a happy ending. She created the famous Five and the Secret Seven, vivid worlds where young people were always the heroes, and parents were kindly figures who provided endless picnics and lemonade. Yet, the reality within her own home was a chilling contrast to the sunny stories she typed out by the thousand. Enid Blyton, arguably the most successful author of the 20th century, was a woman who seemingly preferred the fictional children of her imagination to the real daughters she brought into the world. Her public image was meticulously crafted to show a perfect, doting mother, often posing for glossy magazine photographs, playing cards or reading to her girls, Gillian and Imogen. However, behind the closed doors of their family home, known as Green Hedges, the atmosphere was often cold and emotionally barren. Enid was a woman of fierce discipline and rigid schedules, driven by a relentless need to produce content. She would lock herself away in her study for hours upon hours, demanding absolute silence from the household. The sound of her typewriter was the heartbeat of the home, and everything else, including the needs of her children, came second to her prolific output. Imogen, her younger daughter, later wrote a devastating memoir describing her mother not as a warm storyteller, but as an arrogant and insecure woman who lacked the fundamental maternal instinct. The situation worsened significantly when Enid's first marriage to Hugh Pollock collapsed. In a move that displayed her ruthless streak, she effectively cut the girl's father out of their lives completely. She remarried a surgeon named Kenneth Darrell Waters, and the girls were expected to accept this new reality without question. To facilitate her new life and her increasing workload, the children were sent away to boarding school at a very young age. While this was a common practice for the upper middle class in Britain during the 1940s and 50s, for Enid, it seemed less like an educational choice and more like a convenient solution to clear the decks for her career. With the children out of the house, Enid was free to focus entirely on her writing empire and her busy social calendar. She was adept at compartmentalizing her life, capable of writing heartwarming letters to her young fans, calling them her friends, while completely ignoring the emotional void she was creating for her own offspring. Imogen recalled that her mother simply did not know how to relate to children in the flesh. She only understood them as concepts on a page. The girls would return home for holidays hoping for affection, only to find their mother busy with bridge parties, literary events, or locked away in her creative trance. The irony is profound and painful. The woman who taught millions of children how to be kind, brave, and loyal was unable to offer that same warmth to her own family. She constructed a fortress of fame and fantasy, and her children were often left standing outside the gates, looking in. While she was busy replying to fan mail and managing her vast commercial brand, her daughters navigated their formative years with a mother who was physically present but emotionally absent. It is a dark chapter in literary history, proving that sometimes the creators of the greatest dreams can be the architects of the loneliest realities for those closest to them. Enid Blyton prioritized her legacy as a storyteller over her legacy as a parent, leaving a scar that her children carried long after the books were closed. Marianne Faithfull. With her golden hair and a voice that whispered of melancholic wisdom, she was the ultimate symbol of the swinging 60s, an ethereal muse who captivated the world. Marianne Faithfull seemed to have it all: beauty, talent, and a place at the very center of the cultural revolution exploding in London. However, the chaotic lifestyle that came with being a rock and roll aristocrat was entirely incompatible with the stability required for raising a child. Marianne became a mother at a very young age to her son, Nicholas, but her descent into the darker side of the celebrity world would soon tear them apart. The domestic life she briefly attempted with artist John Dunbar quickly crumbled under the weight of her skyrocketing fame and her intense, high-profile relationship with Mick Jagger. As the decade wore on, Marianne's life began to spiral out of control, moving further and further away from the nursery. The environment she inhabited was filled with parties that lasted for days, relentless media scrutiny, and a total disregard for conventional schedules or safety. It was no place for a little boy. The turning point came when her personal struggles with dependency overwhelmed her ability to function. The bright lights of the stage were replaced by a chemical haze that clouded her judgment and her priorities. She eventually lost custody of Nicholas, a devastating blow that marked the beginning of a long and painful separation. While Nicholas was sent to live with his father and later enrolled in a boarding school to provide him with structure, Marianne's life imploded. For a time, one of the most famous women in Britain was homeless, living on the streets of Soho, sitting on a wall in a state of destitution. She was physically and emotionally light years away from the son she loved but could not care for. The contrast was stark. Her son was learning Latin and cricket in a privileged educational institution, while his mother was fighting for her very survival in the urban wilderness, her name becoming a cautionary tale in the tabloids. Marianne has since spoken with heartbreaking honesty about this period, acknowledging the immense guilt she carried. She did not abandon her son out of a lack of love, but out of a desperate necessity born from her own battles with her demons and the predatory nature of the music industry. She felt she had to lose her role as a mother to eventually save herself from total destruction. The years she missed, the school plays, the grazed knees, the bedtime stories, were the price she paid for her survival and her art. It took decades to rebuild the bridges burnt during those wild days. Nicholas grew up with a mother who was more of a mythical figure or a tragic heroine than a reliable parent. Marianne's journey serves as a stark warning that the rock and roll lifestyle, often glamorized in magazines, demanded a terrible price. In her case, the cost was the childhood of her son, who was left to navigate his formative years in the shadow of his mother's legend, waiting for her to return from a world that had swallowed her whole. The cuckoo in this story was not driven by cold ambition, but by a tragic inability to hold onto the nest while the storm of fame raged around her. Joan Collins. She is the ultimate survivor of the entertainment industry, a woman who defined the word glamour for 5 decades. To the world, Joan Collins was the vengeful and powerful Alexis Carrington, a character who would crush anyone in her path to get what she wanted. However, the script of her real life contained a subplot that was far more poignant than any soap opera storyline. Joan was a woman who refused to be defined solely by domesticity in an era when women were expected to retire after marriage. When she became a mother to Tara and Sasha with her second husband, the actor and singer Anthony Newley, she was determined that her career would not take a back seat. This determination, while admirable in a feminist context, created a childhood for her son and daughter that was defined by luxury, travel, and a profound sense of solitude. From the very beginning, Joan's schedule was punishing. She was filming movies, appearing on television shows, and navigating the social swirl of London and Hollywood. The practical solution to the problem of child-rearing was the employment of a fleet of nannies and the institution of boarding school. Tara Newley, her daughter, has spoken with heartbreaking candor about her upbringing. She described a life where her parents were like magical creatures who would descend from the clouds for brief, dazzling appearances before vanishing again to a world of premieres and parties. The children were often left in the care of paid staff, creating a bond with their nannies that was often stronger than the bond with their own mother. By the time the 1980s arrived and Dynasty made Joan the highest paid actress on television, the separation had become a way of life. Joan was living in Los Angeles, filming exhausting hours to maintain her status as a global icon. Meanwhile, her children were often in boarding schools in England or Switzerland, thousands of miles away from the maternal embrace. The physical distance was compounded by the emotional distance required to maintain the persona of a superstar. Joan was not the type of mother to bake cookies or attend every school sports day. She was the mother who sent expensive gifts and made headlines. The children grew up in the shadow of a woman who was larger than life. They were spectators to her fame, watching her navigate multiple marriages and career revivals while they navigated adolescence largely on their own. Joan believed she was providing them with the best life possible, the best education, the best clothes, the best opportunities. She was the provider, the matriarch who secured their financial future. However, the currency of childhood is time, not money, and that was the one thing Joan could not afford to spend. The nurseries were beautiful, but they were often quiet, lacking the chaotic, messy presence of a mother who was simply there. In later years, Joan would defend her choices, stating that she was a working mother who did what she had to do to survive in a cutthroat industry. She broke glass ceilings for women over 40, proving that beauty and power did not fade with age. Yet, the narrative remains complicated. Her children have had to reconcile the image of the public icon with the private reality of a mother who was often absent. The legacy of Joan Collins is one of undeniable triumph and resilience, but it is also a testament to the sacrifices made behind the velvet ropes. She conquered the world, but in doing so, she often had to leave her own world behind in the care of strangers. Shirley Bassey. She was the girl from Tiger Bay with a voice big enough to knock down the walls of the London Palladium. Dame Shirley Bassey is a national treasure, the only singer to record 3 James Bond themes and a woman who exudes absolute power and glamour on stage. But the road to becoming a global icon was paved with sacrifices that would have broken a lesser spirit. Born into severe poverty in Cardiff, Shirley became a mother at the remarkably young age of 16. In the grey and judgmental Britain of the 1950s, being an unmarried teenage mother was a situation fraught with social stigma and immense difficulty. To survive and to chase the dream that burned within her, she made the heart-wrenching decision to leave her first daughter, Sharon, in the care of her sister and her mother. This early separation set a painful pattern that would define her family life for decades. As her career exploded and she transformed from a cabaret singer into an international superstar, the demands on her time became absolute. Shirley was not just a singer, she was an industry. She was traveling constantly, moving from hotel suite to dressing room, living out of suitcases in New York, Las Vegas, and Monte Carlo. When her second daughter, Samantha, arrived during her marriage to Kenneth Hume, the pressures of stardom had not eased, they had intensified. The solution for the children of the tigress was the structured yet lonely world of boarding schools. While Shirley was receiving standing ovations and wearing gowns that cost more than a house, her daughters were growing up in the quiet corridors of educational institutions, far removed from the glitter. It was a childhood of privilege, certainly, paid for by their mother's incredible work ethic, but it was also a childhood of silence. The disconnect was not just physical. Shirley has admitted in rare moments of vulnerability that she was often too exhausted, too wrapped up in the perfectionism of her performance to be the mother she perhaps wanted to be. The stage demanded everything she had, leaving little emotional reserve for the domestic sphere. The tragedy of this distance came crashing down in 1985, a year that remains etched in sadness for the singer. Her younger daughter, Samantha, was found tragically lifeless in the River Avon in Bristol. It was a devastating blow that shattered Shirley's world. The guilt of a working mother is a heavy burden, but the guilt of a mother who has lost a child under such ambiguous and heartbreaking circumstances is unimaginable. For a time, Shirley lost her voice completely. She could not sing. The instrument that had brought her fame and fortune was silenced by grief and the haunting question of what if? Critics and biographers have often pointed to the solitude of her daughters as the high price of her legendary status. Shirley Bassey conquered poverty, prejudice, and the music industry to become a dame of the British Empire, but the cost was a fractured family life. She gave the world Goldfinger and Big Spender, anthems of power and confidence, yet her own life story is a poignant reminder that even the strongest voices can be drowned out by the quiet regrets of what was missed. She provided her children with a future she never had, but in doing so, she was forced to miss the present they shared. Vanessa Redgrave. Born into the purple of the British theatre, she was the crown princess of an acting dynasty that stretched back for generations. Vanessa Redgrave was not merely a star, she was a force of nature, a woman of towering intellect and undeniable presence who could command the stage with a single glance. However, her intensity was not reserved solely for her art. Vanessa was a woman consumed by a fiery passion for radical politics, a devotion that would often eclipse her role as a mother to her two daughters, Natasha and Jolie. In the swinging 60s, while her contemporaries were enjoying the spoils of fame, Vanessa was marching in the streets, funding revolutions, and dedicating her life to the Workers' Revolutionary Party. The conflict between her public crusade and her private life came to a head during her marriage to the director Tony Richardson. While she loved her children, the domestic sphere was simply too small to contain her ambition to change the world. She was often absent, traveling to protest marches or filming on location, leaving the girls in the care of nannies or their father. The situation deteriorated when her marriage collapsed, leading to a bitter and highly public custody battle. In a move that shocked the conservative society of the 1970s, Tony Richardson was awarded custody of the children. The judge effectively decided that a father who could provide a stable home was preferable to a mother who was selling her own furniture to fund a political cause. With the girls living primarily with their father, the pattern of boarding schools and weekend visits became the norm. Natasha and Jolie were sent to prestigious institutions, effectively growing up in a world of dormitories and term times far removed from the chaotic fervor of their mother's life. Vanessa was the cause mother, the woman who would arrive for a visit not with toys or sweets, but with political pamphlets and lectures on the state of the proletariat. Her love for humanity in the abstract was immense, yet her ability to be present for the specific little humans she had created was constantly compromised by her ideology. The girls often recalled a childhood where their mother was a glamorous, passionate, but distant figure. They would see her on the news, being arrested at demonstrations, or accepting Academy Awards more often than they would see her at the breakfast table. The emotional toll was significant. Natasha, in particular, spoke of the feeling of abandonment, the sense that she was competing for her mother's attention not with another sibling, but with the entire suffering population of the world. Vanessa's focus was global, her children's needs were local, and the two rarely aligned. It is a testament to the resilience of the human spirit that both daughters eventually followed their mother onto the stage and screen, forging their own successful careers. In later years, particularly before the tragic and untimely passing of Natasha in 2009, the relationship between the three women deepened and healed. However, the scars of those early years remained. Vanessa Redgrave's story is a powerful illustration of the sacrifices demanded by a life lived in the public eye. She fought tirelessly for the rights of the oppressed, for justice and for art, but the collateral damage of her crusade was the quiet, structured childhood her daughters never had. She was a mother to the movement first and a mother to her children second. Elizabeth Taylor. She was the woman with the violet eyes who possessed a beauty so arresting it seemed to stop time itself. Elizabeth Taylor was not merely an actress, she was a global industry, a walking diamond who commanded the attention of the world from the moment she appeared as a child star. Born in Hampstead, London, she carried the weight of stardom for her entire conscious life, but the role she found most difficult to play was that of a traditional mother. With a personal life that was as dramatic and turbulent as any script she was offered, Elizabeth entered into 8 marriages, creating a chaotic and nomadic environment for her 4 children: Michael, Christopher, Liza, and Maria. The 1960s were the peak of her fame and the height of her notorious romance with Richard Burton. The couple became the most famous duo on the planet, pursued by a relentless pack of photographers wherever they went. For the children, this meant a life lived in the back of limousines, in hotel suites, and on the decks of the yacht Charisma. While it sounds like a fairy tale of wealth and privilege, the reality was a childhood defined by instability. To protect them from the paparazzi and to facilitate her own grueling filming schedules around the world, Elizabeth relied heavily on a fleet of nannies and the institution of boarding school. The children were often sent away to prestigious schools in Europe and America, including the exclusive Millfield in England and Institut Le Rosey in Switzerland. This was done partly for their safety, but it also served to clear the stage for the operatic drama of Elizabeth's marriage to Burton. Their relationship was a storm of passion, arguments, and excess, an atmosphere that was hardly suitable for a quiet upbringing. The children were spectators to their mother's intense emotional life, often waiting in the wings while she navigated her public battles and her private health struggles. Elizabeth was a woman of immense generosity and love, but her ability to be physically present was constantly compromised by the demands of her celebrity. She was the breadwinner, the matriarch who had to keep the show on the road to support the lavish lifestyle they all enjoyed. However, this meant that the simple, quiet moments of motherhood, helping with homework, cooking a meal, or simply being there after a bad dream, were luxuries she rarely could afford. The children grew up in a golden cage, surrounded by expensive toys and famous faces, but often lacking the one thing they craved most: a mother who was just mum, not the biggest movie star in the world. In her later years, Elizabeth fought hard to repair the bonds that had been stretched thin by her career and her personal demons. She spoke openly about her regrets and her love for her family. Yet, the history remains. For long stretches of their formative years, her children were raised by staff and teachers, looking at their mother's face on cinema screens more often than they saw it across the breakfast table. Her legacy is one of incomparable glamour and talent, but it is also a poignant reminder that the brightest stars often cast the longest shadows over those standing closest to them. She gave her audience everything she had, leaving her family to share what little was left. Charlotte Rampling. She was the enigmatic face of the swinging 60s, a woman whose hooded eyes and cool, distant gaze made her the ultimate icon of European art house cinema. Charlotte Rampling was never interested in the sugary roles of the typical starlet. She sought depth, darkness, and a level of intellectual honesty that often left those around her feeling unsettled. However, this same pursuit of personal and artistic truth led to a life that was frequently nomadic and emotionally detached. When she became a mother to her son, Barnaby, during her marriage to the actor Brian Southcombe, Charlotte found herself caught between the heavy demands of her blossoming career and the quiet needs of a nursery. As the 1970s progressed, Charlotte's professional life took her across borders, from the film sets of London to the sophisticated circles of Paris and Rome. She was a woman who lived for her craft, often immersing herself so deeply in complex psychological roles that the mundane world of domesticity seemed entirely alien to her. To accommodate her international lifestyle and her need for creative freedom, she made choices that would place a significant distance between herself and her child. Barnaby was often left in the care of nannies or placed in the structured environment of boarding school, a decision that allowed Charlotte to maintain her status as a global muse without the daily interruptions of parenthood. The situation became even more complex when she moved to France and entered a long, intense marriage with the composer Jean-Michel Jarre. Her life became a whirlwind of French high society, artistic experimentation, and the pursuit of a specific kind of intellectual perfection. While she raised David and Emily alongside Barnaby in a sprawling house outside Paris, the emotional atmosphere was often described as one of cool detachment. Charlotte has been remarkably candid in her later years about her struggles with depression, a dark cloud that often made it impossible for her to be the warm, nurturing presence her children required. She often spoke of motherhood as a role she found difficult to inhabit comfortably. For Charlotte, the self was a sacred space that could not be easily compromised, even by the needs of her offspring. She believed that to be a great artist, one had to be somewhat selfish, a philosophy that meant her children often had to navigate their own emotional landscapes without her guidance. They were provided with every intellectual and cultural advantage, growing up in a world of art and music, but the price was a mother who was frequently absent, either physically on a distant film set or emotionally locked within her own internal battles. In the decades that followed, those close to the family noted that her children had to forge their own paths in the shadow of a woman who was more of an enigma than a matriarch. Barnaby, who eventually became a director himself, had to reconcile the public image of his mother as a cinematic legend with the private reality of a woman who was often out of reach. Charlotte Rampling's story is a sophisticated tragedy of the modern era, a tale of a woman who chose to live life on her own uncompromising terms, proving that even the most brilliant light can feel cold to those standing just outside its glow. She remained true to her art, but the cost was a family life defined by a haunting sense of distance. Julie Andrews. The image of Mary Poppins descending from the clouds with her umbrella is one of the most beloved sights in the history of cinema. To the world, Julie Andrews was the ultimate nanny, the woman who could fix any family with a song and a spoonful of sugar. She was the pristine, angelic voice of the British stage and the quintessential English rose of Hollywood. However, the reality of her own life as a mother was a far cry from the perfect harmony of The Sound of Music. When she gave birth to her daughter, Emma, during her marriage to set designer Tony Walton, Julie was at the very beginning of her meteoric rise to global superstardom. The 1960s were a whirlwind that demanded every ounce of her energy, leaving her little time to be the perfect parent she portrayed on the screen. As the demands of her career reached a fever pitch, Julie found herself caught in a relentless cycle of filming in Los Angeles and performing on Broadway. The domestic life she might have envisioned was quickly replaced by a high-stakes professional existence. To manage this, she relied heavily on the traditional British solution: boarding schools and professional help. Emma was often left in the care of others, while her mother was busy winning Academy Awards and becoming a household name. The irony was not lost on the public or the family. The world's most famous nanny was frequently absent from her own daughter's bedside, a situation that created a quiet but persistent emotional gap. The pressure to maintain her wholesome, practically perfect image was immense. Julie felt she had to provide for her family and secure their future, but the cost was the daily connection that a young child needs. When she later married director Blake Edwards and they adopted 2 more children, Amy and Joanna, from Vietnam, the family dynamic became even more complex. While Julie was a dedicated mother in her own way, the reality of her life meant that her children often had to share her with the entire world. They grew up in a world of luxury and film sets, but they also had to navigate the loneliness of prestigious educational institutions where their mother was a face on a poster in the dormitory rather than a presence in the kitchen. Emma later spoke about the challenges of having a mother who was a national icon. She described the feeling of living in a gilded cage where expectations were high and the shadow of her mother's perfection was long. The children were well provided for and given every opportunity, but the physical absence of their mother during key formative moments was a reality they had to accept. Julie herself has reflected on the terrible guilt that plagues every working mother, a feeling that was magnified 1,000 times by the scale of her fame. She was a woman who gave joy to millions of families, yet she often struggled to find the time to simply be a mother to her own. In the later chapters of her life, Julie worked tirelessly to bridge the distance, even co-authoring dozens of children's books with Emma. This creative partnership became a way for them to heal and find a common language that they had missed during the hectic years of the 60s and 70s. Her story is a poignant reminder that even the most perfect figures in our culture are human beings who face impossible choices. She chose to share her gift with the world, but in doing so, she had to entrust the upbringing of her own children to the care of others, leaving a legacy of beautiful music tinged with the quiet sadness of lost time. Sarah Miles. She was the wild child of British cinema, a woman whose ethereal beauty was matched only by her reputation for being unpredictable and fiercely independent. Sarah Miles became a household name following her breathtaking performance in Ryan's Daughter, a role that cemented her status as one of the most compelling actresses of the 1970s. However, the very qualities that made her a star, her restless spirit and her refusal to conform to social norms, made the traditional role of motherhood an uncomfortable fit. When she had her son, Thomas, with the famous playwright Robert Bolt, she found herself at a crossroads between the quiet demands of the nursery and the intoxicating allure of the film set and the high society circles of London. As her career took her to distant locations and kept her under the spotlight, Sarah struggled to balance the intensity of her professional life with the stability a young child requires. She was a woman who lived for the moment, often prioritizing her own emotional and artistic experiences above all else. To facilitate her nomadic lifestyle, she relied on the standard practice of the British elite, placing Thomas in the care of nannies and eventually sending him to boarding school. For Sarah, this was not an act of cold abandonment, but a way to ensure her son had a structured environment while she navigated the chaotic and often volatile world of international show business. The 1970s were a decade of excess and exploration for the actress, and her private life was frequently the subject of tabloid gossip. She was often away for months at a time, immersed in roles that demanded her total concentration, leaving her son to be raised by surrogate parents in the form of teachers and domestic staff. Thomas grew up in a world where his mother was a glamorous visitor, a woman who would arrive in a whirlwind of energy and stories from the set, only to vanish again when the next project called. The physical distance was compounded by Sarah's own unconventional approach to life, which sometimes left her children feeling like spectators to her grand adventure rather than participants in a family unit. In later years, the emotional cost of these choices became more apparent. Sarah has been open about her unique perspective on life, including her interest in alternative therapies and her refusal to play by the rules of conventional society. While this made her a fascinating public figure, it created a complex legacy for her son. Thomas had to forge his own identity in the shadow of two incredibly powerful and famous parents, often doing so from the isolation of a dormitory. The cuckoo nature of her motherhood was born from a desire to remain a free spirit, a woman who refused to let the walls of a home contain her ambitions or her sense of self. Today, the story of Sarah Miles serves as a final, striking example of an era when the pursuit of stardom often required a total devotion that left little room for the mundane realities of parenting. She remains an icon of British film, a woman who brought unforgettable characters to life with raw honesty. Yet, the private chapter of her life as a mother is a story of distance and the high price of independence. She gave her son a life of privilege and a famous name, but the warmth of a constant maternal presence was the one thing the script of her life did not include. She conquered the screen on her own terms, leaving behind a trail of cinematic brilliance and a family history defined by the search for a connection that fame had made so difficult to maintain.